Hi. Uh, Saturday, May 24th. Here we go. This is my usual weekly live, and I'm wondering there's someone in the room, and I'm betting it's the Rev. It's the Right Honorable Rev, or maybe not. Anyway, say who you are if you like, and give me anything you want to start with. In the meantime, I'll start with what's up with me, what I've been thinking about, what's been going on for me lately, and see if anybody shows up and wants to propose something we talk about. So, there've been a couple of interesting weeks. I knew it was Rev Walt. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, even though I don't. Feel free to get in touch. Tell me what you want to talk about. In the meantime, I was in Mexico for 4 days, just before my last Saturday thing. Made it here. Hello, meow. Great to have you here. I'm chill right now, open and curious. Okay. I got back from Mexico, a little bit of a disappointing trip. I made an investment, an impulse purchase down there a while ago, and it 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 fascinates and disappoints me that I did it. I bought a place down there, and in some ways it's a good thing. In some ways, just not part of the way my life tends to go. It's a little bit like falling in love. I like my life unencumbered, and somehow I ended up with a property down there that took a whole lot of remodeling and management. Part of it was a sense that I should have a place to go. Should I run out of money? Should Trump become too dangerous to live around? That sort of thing. And then I came back and also felt like I was not in my groove around the video making. That had become quite the addiction for me. Really fussing over videos and how to make it better and how to maintain audience. And even before I went to Mexico, there was a trailing off of interest. And me, as I talked about last week, there's a way in which I don't want to care about that. And at the same time, I'm really trying to maximize my utility or intuitive value to people. That's part of my addiction, is that feeling of being useful somehow. And then on top of that, maybe 15 years ago, a scientist friend of mine, a geneticist of some renown, had introduced me to nicotine gum and then nicotine pouches. And a week ago, well, I've decided this before, but I decided enough already with this. It's not a good thing for me. And so I've been coming off of that for a week, and it's been interesting to watch me deal with that as well. Because there were times between the disorientation about being in Mexico and the disorientation about not sure what I'm doing with my videos and the disorientation of coming off of nicotine. There are a couple of days when I was kind of wobbly. To Rev Walt's point, hello, Michael, good to see you here. To Rev Walt's point, a man's search for feeling meaningful is, I think, much more to the point than for the meaning of the universe. That that interests me, that difference. And I, once again, nothing I describe about other people is beyond me to do. My appetite to feel meaningful is pretty strong. And actually, this week I spent some time with my 87-year-old buddy, and we were both reflecting how in our lives that need to feel useful. What have I done for me lately? And it is for the world, but it's also for me. It's a sense that I'm of some value. I'm not good at chilling. I have a brother who's good at it. We had a conversation this week. In Mexico, there's encouragement to chill. It's not my thing. I'm just not doing that with my life. I'm way more intense than that. Anyway, you might have seen that one thing I started doing this week very casually was making a different kind of video. Sort of like ones in the past, but these are at most 3 minutes long. I found this new tool called Opus Clip, which automatically puts on the subtitles and makes it more like a YouTube short. You can put in one of these big fat videos that I've made, and it cuts it up and makes it into lots of short videos. But what I started doing was embodying Trump mind and just describing tips for becoming more effective at keeping your spirits up. These are all the nasty tricks I've been talking about that assholes engage in, or absolutists. And it's been fun. I can knock these things out quickly. There's been a couple of technical glitches, but I think it's a useful way to express what I think is going on with them. And it's also brought out some Trump trolls, which, as you know, is something I want. I want more engagement there. Um, and because I'm still trying out what to say to try to disappoint that trolling mind. But in the meantime, I can also harvest off of whatever they say the next helpful tip from a MAGA guy, the guy who wears this hat, about how to keep your spirits up, because I think that's really what it's all about. It's all egotainment. It's all herobotic egotainment. Let's see. Engagement equals study material. Yeah, I'll say something about that. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but hello, Jeff. Good to have you here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Global. Hello. It's just nice to have, you know, it's nice to have you here. Engagement equals study material. I just want to, this is an interesting thing to me. I think of two kinds of study. There are, let's say, at the extreme, you've got someone who has found a belief. They've had a revelation, and all that they're doing is studying to reinforce their revelation. Their revelation would be a way of feeling good about themselves. So, for example, someone who's religious, who just reads the Bible over and over, that's one kind of study material. You're studying to deepen the groove you found, and it would be, I think, a groove for comfort. There's another kind of study material, which is more interesting, which is you're studying contradictory positions. You study alternative perspectives. So you have your belief or your commitment, and then you read something that counters it. I remember, for example, one time when I was going through a midlife crisis, and I thought what I really needed in my life was a goal. And so I went out and bought this book called Living Without a Goal. And it was written by this guy who later became a friend. I got in touch with him. We ended up collaborating on lots of things. He's one of the members. I brought him into the research group with Terrence Deacon. His name is Jay Ogilvy. He took me to India twice because he was a business consultant, and I worked with him in India with Motorola. So all sorts of interesting things came out of it. But what I'm saying is, when I had a conviction, I went out and found an opposite perspective. That's a different kind of study from the kind of study that, let's say, you'll get from a Trumpist, who just keeps on reinforcing what they already know. I do have a theory about that. Whenever we watch the same thing over and over, the way that a Trumpist does with Fox News, or the way that any of us might do with, for example, pornography videos, it's especially as jaded as we are these days, that's really just about self-reassurance. If you're doing the same thing over and over, propaganda would be like that. Propaganda would be a way of, at the end of the day, you've had some challenging encounters with other people. You go home and you replenish your mojo by listening to Fox News, something like that. Okay. And that reinforcement is strong. Well, it's a very rich mix these days. You can get a whole lot of reinforcement for being a Trumpist. This morality tale is not going well. It was supposed to end differently. And that's also, obviously, I think for all of us, some of what is mind-boggling. It's actually kind of discrediting to humankind. Nothing personal. And you could say not even our fault, but it turns out there really is something like evil. We were playing for a while with a hopeful sense that evil is just misguidedness or something like that. This last week, right? Yeah, we have lots of names for that evil, including greed. But for me, for example, I've long played with the question, okay, well, wait a second. Everybody is selfish. And I mean that down to the origins of life. That is, one way or another, organisms are prioritizing their own needs. So where do you draw the line on greed? everyone is also always saving for a rainy day. And I take that also to the origins of life. You cannot survive as a lineage. None of the lineages that survive at replacement rate. You have to make more than enough offspring in order to survive. You have to collect more than enough of anything. You need that margin of security. So where do you draw the line on greed? And Rev Walt, I agree with you. That is, it's clear that there is such a thing as too much. But where you draw that line is a little complicated. And anyway, you don't get to draw the line. The billionaires get to draw the line. That's the unfortunate part of it. So there's also something about this last couple of weeks, the studying, not clear what I'm doing in videos, little disappointed by my trip to Mexico, coming off of nicotine, and also a sense that a tension between the part of me that wants to keep on putting out videos and the part of me that doesn't exactly know what the fuck to do at this point. It hasn't been strong, but it's been there, a sense that I don't want to be out there voicing opinions that are dubious to me. I mean, I do a lot of that. That is, I flag everything as uncertain, but there are times when I need to shut up and try and figure out what I actually think now. I need to update my understanding of the world around me. So there was some of that as well this week. And I seem to ride through these, but they do come up. And I think it's useful for me I think this is part of what's happening to my channel. Rather than being an influencer who's presenting, it's just more like slice of life. And I'm a guy who has my ups and downs and uncertainties, and that's actually part of what I'm promoting. And without platitudes to override it, but actually, like, sometimes I get confused and need to shut up and figure out what I think or what I'm doing, that kind of thing. I get disoriented. Do you? Not everything in humanity is aesthetically pleasing or civilized. I'd like to hear more about what you mean by that. I agree. But I wonder what you mean. Not everything in humanity is aesthetically pleasing or civilized. There is, here's one connection. And by the way, so Rev Walt is making comments and feeding me good ideas to play with here. And that's a good one. And I want to do that one. And I'm grateful for Rev Walt for doing that. But also, if you've got anything that's come up this week, let me know. I want to think about what's interesting to you. See, Global says, so collapse the box and take a fucking sharp knife to it. Banksy. I want to come back to that. Let me just say this one thing about, I think one of the things that we're kind of recovering from is what I've called romantic humanism. And it goes something like this. It's also tied to what I call positive optimism. So romantic humanism is this. Once we got our rational, critical thinking minds as human beings that other animals don't have, we are the stewards of the planet, and we can make all our decisions rationally and come up with the right plans and the right behavior. We see examples of this. You've got the Martin Luther Kings and you've got the Nelson Mandelas and the Abraham Lincolns. And why can't we all be like that? I mean, what you've got is people who are selfless and not greedy and thoughtful, and we should be ruled by them and we should be like them. This last week, I reread Plato's Republic. It's been a long time since I read it. Didn't remember much from it. It's full of that kind of romantic humanism, the sense that we are no longer tethered to the behavior, the unpleasant, the aesthetically unpleasing and uncivilized behavior of animals, and that we can just grow forward from our through our minds, through our rational minds, like we aren't these mid-sized mammals who just just got this windfall of this newfangled contraption called language. That's interesting to me. That is, and I still have friends, maybe because I live in Berkeley, who talk like that. Why can't we all get along Uh, why can't we all just be critical thinkers if we were all critical thinkers? Plato, who's just discovered words, I mean, these are the first people to be writing down their guesses about what reality is and their role in it. It's full of romantic humanism. It's this sense that you could get to this selfless place, no greed, uh, just a good person. It's a it's a fascinating read. I have read it. I listened to it. I don't sit and read books anymore, but it reads plenty engaging that way. Yes, okay. And Jeff Chaney says, I keep coming back to self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Yeah. Um, and I also want to get back to the Banksy comment. The problem for me with self-awareness, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, any of these names, is they don't seem to completely recognize the recursive nature of it. So I can I agree with you, Jeff. I think a lot of what's going on for anybody who becomes an absolutist is avoiding any kind of self-awareness. For example, if you look at the comments that I'm getting on these new videos, the quantity of people who say you're projecting, these are Trump trolls who say you're projecting with no awareness of their own projecting when they say that. You can project by accusing someone of projecting. That's the recursive quality of it. So whenever we have a thing like self-awareness, these are guys, I'll hear from Trump trolls who will say, yeah, it seems to me in my uh, it appears that you have no self-awareness. Okay, so as soon as you got a term like self-awareness or critical thinking, I get accused of not being a critical thinker by Trumpists all the time, or lacking emotional intelligence. There's a sense that that's a recipe. And it's not a recipe because of reciprocation. I'll have to look up the relationship between those two words. Reciprocation is that the same thing can be bounced back like a hall of mirrors, like a reciprocal engine. And then you end up with this complication. So, for example, if I accuse you of projecting and you accuse me of projecting, and we go back and forth like that, layer upon layer of mirror and all of that. So this is a recipes yield reciprocation. Um, that I can accuse a Trumpist of lacking self-awareness, and they can accuse me of lacking self-awareness. And at that point, you're just ricocheting. You're just bouncing back and forth. So while I'm with you on them, I want to recognize that they're bottomless. That one of the earliest thoughts that intrigued me was this thing about I called it the four eyes that make up a mind. This is 35 years ago, practically. Um, that there's my behavior, which I called I to the zeroth power. It's just I, like me, to zero power. Then there's my running unexamined narrative about who I am. So it's where I could say I'm a good person, or I'm a nicotine pouch consumer, or I'm the author of books, or something, but something like that. That's I to the first power. I squared is where you get self-awareness. No, you get meta self-awareness. So if I said I'm a good person, that's my running unexamined story about myself. Then I can then tell a story about that story. I can say I like to think I'm a good person. So that's I squared. And then there's I to the infinite power, which is for every narrative I tell, for every awareness of myself, another awareness could be of the awareness of that awareness. It goes on and on. So this is, that was I the infinite power, I on and on and on, ion. Silly stuff. It was back when I was, silly names. But it was intriguing to me, this thing about self-awareness and how it plays out recursively. I can hold up the mirror to any mirror holder up to myself, and so there's something related to our tendency towards recipe or repertoire. Yes, Jeff, that's the point. I'm gonna have to look up the relationship between recipe and reciprocation, because reciprocation is really an interesting part of this whole approach that I'm taking from origins of life to what the actual fuck we are. Um, Reciprocation is fundamental to it. It's basically a chain reaction in chemistry. Um, what we call autocatalysis. It's where one molecule makes other catalysts that one catalyst makes another catalyst that makes more copies of the first catalyst. That's called autocatalysis or reciprocal catalysis. When those halls of mirrors drive us crazy, but they're also how we drive around. A car is a reciprocating engine. It's a work cycle that brings itself back around. Yes, so Revwalt, that's what we're talking about, a chain reaction. And so I don't think you could have life without these kind of reciprocal relationships. And what they end up doing is, well, it's a longer story that I will be getting out, but I'm still working on it. I mean, just came back from a walk with Terry where we were working out the details of this stuff, the relationship between iteration, reciprocation, and recursion. But one thing you can also say about it is that there is, in a recipe like the Trumpist's recipe, there is a kind of internal self-reciprocation. So what I just described to you about telling a story about the telling of the story, when I say, I like to think I'm a good guy, um, when I do that, when am aware of myself as a storyteller about my behavior, that's the opening for second guessing oneself. But I think what we've been dancing around for a while here in this conversation, this goes back to study material, it goes back to thinking outside the box or staying within a box. It's what I call second yesing. So if I said I'm a good person, and I know that I'm a good person because I checked with myself 3 times, and every time I agreed with myself, that's second yesing yourself. So that's a kind of a closed loop. It's like the closed loop you'd get from the people who say the Bible was written by God. How do we know it? Because it says so in the Bible. That kind of a closed loop, what I call a hermetically sealed hermeneutic. A recipe would tend to have that flavor about it. Yeah, I'm way out on a limb here. Let me come back then to think outside the box, collapse the box, and take a fucking sharp knife to it. Banksy. Okay. Rhetorically, I like it. Remember, I separate rhetoric, the quality of rhetoric from the content is really important to me. So I like how it's framed up. I don't like its content. I mean, I'm wary of its content. One way I would deal with a comment like this from someone I'm very enthusiastic about, like Banksy, is I'd run it through someone else's mouth, a shithead's mouth. So now just try this thing out here. Let's replace Banksy with Musk. What do you get? You get the fucking chainsaw. Okay. And besides, it implies that we don't like boxes. That's not true. That is simply not true. We need boxes. We crave boxes. We need ways to, it's just too much world. We need ways to simplify our world. All of us do. You could say that there are people who really can't keep up and therefore they are kenneling themselves up in the tightest little box where there's no room to play, and they're basically swaddled like babies. So there is a kind of base hugging that you get from any kind of absolutist. And what they'll do, once again, this is that reciprocalness, is that they'll accuse other people of being inside a box. So this morning, as I was scrambling to try and figure out, okay, how am I going to respond to these Trump trolls? Because they're all opportunities for me to think about what might say. And I don't know if I got around to it. I will, but this is what I thought of on the drive home from my walk with Terry, which is basically saying, yeah, love to talk with you, but not, but but it's something like come back when you're not talking like you're inside you're a chimp inside a cage throwing your feces at anybody outside the cage. Something like that. I'd tighten it up, but it would be something like that because it's completely lightweight. And I'm simply want to say we're here to talk, but not when you're basically a an ape throwing your shit because you're bored and restless and in a box you kept yourself in. Um, can you imagine a life without boxes? Just to come to the other side of this perspective, can you see what it would be like if you didn't have constraints, things that were unlikely, things that you'd already said no to? No, if you were in a life where anything goes, which is kind of the point of a box is not everything goes. Some things go, other things don't go. I want to be in the right boxes, not the wrong boxes. I want to have goals, but I want to have the right goals. Um, so think outside the box, collapse the box and take a fucking sharp knife to it. Nah, I mean, that's the kind of bravado I would get from a Trumpist who is snug inside their box. A chainsaw is way different from a sharp razor. Rev Walt, I'm not sure you want to go. Explain to me why I should think that's completely different. He said sharp knife, by the way, and take a fucking sharp knife to it, which sounds a little bit more chainsaw-like. I don't want to allow myself any of these uh, false distinctions or false equivalents. So I love this. I love that you brought that up. A chainsaw is way different from a sharp razor. Let me give you another example of that. Suppose, as happens with these Trump trolls who get in touch with me, they try to shame me for shaming. One of them pulled this morning that same thing that Bill Maher pulled, which is you've just insulted half the country. Bill Maher, I used to admire him. I think he's a total fucking lightweight because of this kind of degree of inconsistency in his behavior. He's the kind of guy who he's what I refer to as cliche Guevara. That is, he's saying the same things that everybody else is, but he's making it sound edgy. But whatever. So this Trump troll gets in touch with me and says, "You've just insulted 50% of the country." This is a Trump troll, right? Who says that? Okay. So he's shaming me for shaming people, right? And if I said to him, "Okay, you're using shaming," and he said, "No, no, no. What I'm doing is completely different. It's apples and oranges. You shamed 50% of the country. I'm just calling out. I'm just educating you about appropriate behavior." So what do you do in a situation like that? It's basically an apples and oranges move. He's saying, no, it's completely different. When I do it, I see to me, all that's going on with these guys is that it's never a moral debate with them. It's all when I do it, it's saintly. When you do it, it's sinful. That's all they've got going on. So yes, they would rely on this technique. If you can get them to stick around and say, well, you just shame me for shaming. Is there a difference between your shaming and my shaming that, you just insulted me? They will say, oh, no, completely different. And then they'll just paraphrase it differently. How do you deal with a situation like that? Well, the sciences actually give us a clear way to do that. Really, this is a very important technique for me. How do you know whether you're actually dealing with apples and oranges? You operationalize it. You come up with an operational definition. So, Rev Walt, to your point about chainsaws, chainsaw is way different from a sharp razor or sharp knife. Okay, so I would ask you to operationalize that. What does that mean? Doesn't mean you give me examples. Well, Elon Musk uses a chainsaw, but Banksy, who I like, by the way, I like him lots. He uses a sharp knife. No, what you'd have to do, you can't just give me examples at the extremes because I'm interested in the gray area in between. How do you know the difference between a chainsaw and a sharp razor? Um, I'd say, okay, imagine hiring some stranger to to distinguish between chainsaws and sharp knives. What instructions would you give them? That's how you come up with an operational distinction. Okay, so it's a stranger. You don't know what their biases are. For all you know, they hate Banksy and love Musk. They're a stranger. And you got to give them an objective way. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate, but it does have to be objective. It has to be a neutral way that, as best as possible, reflects the difference. It can't just be, I don't like Musk, therefore that's a chainsaw and chainsaws are bad. I do like Banksy, and therefore that's a sharp knife and sharp knives are good. Um, I don't hear enough distinction between what Banksy said. And I want to notice those differences. I had a wonderful conversation this week with someone who got in touch around the study group. I really impressed by this person. Down in the LA area, um, uh, was working blue collar jobs that had her driving around a lot, didn't have much use for NPR because it was kind of boring. Got into Rush Limbaugh, got way into Rush Limbaugh. To where she was a full-on Trump supporter. January 6th, completely changed her mind. Suddenly she said, wait, I've been fooled. She's got the internal dialectic that fascinates me, that I wish for all of us, an ability to see yourself contradicting yourself. She started to look at the contradictions in her own behavior, got curious about it, rolled up her sleeves. Really impressive. Whenever you can do that, I call it intellectual bi-curiosity. And you probably heard me mention this before. It's that if you can hear yourself talking out both sides of your mouth, being inconsistent, that's where the pay dirt is. It's the opposite of that kind of study where you just study whatever reinforces what you already know. To be able to look squarely at that, and for her to do this with no background in it, gave me some hope for humanity. Not much, because she's talking about all the friends she's got or the people she deals with who haven't made that transition. But anyway, let's see, where are we? Let's see. I'm looking for any other comments. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to say something and help me think. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that. And so I don't know if you've heard this concept out of complexity theory that life is lived on the edge of chaos. This week, I blurted in some interaction, I can't remember who, that life is lived on the edge of clueless. Um, uh, Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Let's unpack that a little bit. Reading Self-Reliance always makes me feel young. Good. Can anybody here make the counter argument to consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds? He's basically saying consistency is bad. I definitely can see his point. I started out there. I talked about how I'm in flux. Makes me a little uncomfortable to be in flux. My box is a little loose these last couple of days. What with the nicotine withdrawals, which, by the way, I should say, when you do the edible, I never smoke cigarettes, but if you do them, I don't find it that terrible. But still, it's been a shakier week than some, and I like my weeks to be tight. I like to feel consistent. I like to wake up in the morning, knowing what I'm for, knowing what I'm going to do. That whole sense of flow that I know what I'm going to do. It's on the edge of my abilities, but I definitely can do it. That kind of thing. Okay. Can we unpack? So I'm grateful for my inconsistency this week. Without variation, flow takes over. Without variation, well, variation is the first law of everything. That is, everything is diverging. Without constraints, without cages, without boxes, everything takes flow. So what we're really talking about with boxes is how we make some kinds of work unlikely, some kinds of change unlikely. Keeping my shit together is preventing the second law of thermodynamics, the first law of everything. That's what it is. So consistency, I am trying to maintain some kinds of consistency. And I'll argue that the Trumpists are trying to maintain other kinds of consistency. So I don't want to just say consistency good or consistency bad. I don't think that's useful. I want to unpack and figure out which kinds of consistencies. Well, as I've long said, the Trumpists are absolutely consistent about one thing, which is their claim of consistency. And as a result, so this is their running unexamined story, unexaminable. You cannot get them to look at this story, but they simply say, no, I'm always consistent. That's all. They just keep on saying, I'm consistent. You're the one who's a hypocrite. So because they have that cover story and because they don't have to look at their own behavior, because they simply second, yes, look, I'm consistent. I've checked with myself 3 times, and every time I've checked with myself, I agree that I'm consistent. They get to be completely inconsistent about everything else. This is basically this is a feature of playing God, from my perspective. God is one. God is entirely consistent. Why is it that God doesn't create paradoxical situations? Why doesn't he build a mountain so big he can't move it? Why doesn't he create a puzzle so hard he can't solve it? Because he's entirely consistent. That's the argument you get. So when someone says, I'm entirely consistent, that's a form of playing God. And like God, they can be completely inconsistent as long as they do. Okay, let's see. I do have some QA and to have the consistency with my processes. Okay, I'm not sure what QA means there, but yes, yeah. So even if you said be consistently inconsistent, this is another way to unpack and get to this by curiosity, to hear yourself saying opposite things. So this is recursion. This is where you pour it back into itself. So if someone said the only thing constant is change, or if someone said uh, be consistently flexible, you start to hear what you want to play with if you're in this world where you're actually curious. Is you want to play with those tensions, and you don't want to throw up your hands and say, well, it's all bullshit, therefore. Or you don't want to say, well, no, but consistency is bad, or consistency is good. You don't want to do that. You want to actually be dealing with tussling with it. That's where I live. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate, is that it's scary. You lose a lot of your box when you do this because you keep on disorienting yourself. You keep on throwing yourself off base. And in the process, you're also recognizing the ways that the bedrock, reality's bedrock, keeps pulling the rug out from under you. That's why recursion is so fundamentally fascinating to me. Recursion meaning where you take something and you feed it back into itself. That's why when I look at all of these moral principles, I see paradoxes. I don't see principles. Consistency, commit yourself to flexibility. That's a paradox. That's a paradox because it means what are you doing? Are you committing yourself, or are you being flexible? That's a paradox I live with, which is where to be consistent, where to be inconsistent. So I like a thing like consistency is a hobgoblin of little minds as a way to dislodge myself from thinking consistency is good, but I don't want an overstep in the right direction to where I think consistency is bad. I'm trying to figure out where to be consistent and where not to. It's true of all the moral principles. I invite you to give me an example of a moral principle that you either hear a lot or you find valuable. It could be like the Banksy comment. It could be like this thing about consistency. But just listen to a list of them. Do not be negative is inherently negative. You shouldn't be judgmental is inherently judgmental. Be intolerant of intolerance is inherently intolerant. Compromise to everyone so no one need compromise is the golden paradox. It is not a rule. It's a paradox, which raises the question about who should you accommodate. Hate. These are all examples of things that you hear in society. They're presented as if shame the shamers would be another. They're presented as if they're the statement of some kind of moral law. They are all tough judgment calls. Okay, to its excellent consistency, consists to stand together, firm to exist together. Good, thank you. I must be checking etymology every few hours. I'm on there, and I don't want to fall for the etymological fallacy, which is the assumption that whatever a word originally meant is what it means now. Nice used to mean ignorant, stupid. It started out meaning stupid. If you look up the word nice in the etymology, online etymology dictionary, that's my favorite one. Man, has that word migrated around. It used to mean stupid. It's quite meandering. But anyway, let's take this. Okay, consistency. I'm going to look it up while you're at it. While we're all at it. Consistency, etymology, consistent, to stand firm. Yes, so with, stand together. Thank you. Sorry, I probably didn't need to look it up, but I just did. Break it down. Consistency, yes. It's metaphoric, standing. What do we mean? I guess what I would say is that here's where my consistency is. It comes off the word stand. It's the capacity to stand corrected, and that was what was impressive to me about this woman from LA. Was that she identified as learning, and therefore could stand corrected with her dignity intact. That impressed the shit out of me. And then I heard from someone else this week, an academic, who said, yeah, I think you misread the word learned. You seem to have a prejudice against learned. This is a scholar I admire a lot. But he was concerned about that. I mean something. I don't want to identify as learned. I do not want to identify as learned. And I think that Trumpists want to identify as learned when actually all they are is learned out. That is, they're just burnt out on learning. And why are they burnt out on learning? Because they lose dignity every time they have to learn something. The freedom they demand most fundamentally is the freedom from having to ever learn anything again, except better ways to not have to learn. That's the only thing they're still studying, from what I can tell. Learning is scary. I did not like this week as much as prior weeks. I did not like wondering whether, I did not like having to go back to the drawing board and figure out what I'm doing with my videos. I didn't like, being disoriented. I like my groove. I like my box. So it's almost a capacity for doubt tolerance that I'm trying to cultivate in myself. And I assume that the same would be true for you. Let's see. Yes, and Revwalt, the same idea, I got to hold both ideas in my head at once and still be able to make decisions. So that's, in a way, what I'm talking about. The old F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, all that. Where to follow a recipe and where to improvise. Yes, that's there too. In biology and computer science, it's referred to as explore versus exploit. Exploit a found solution or explore for a better solution. Consistency, consistency is the hobgoblin of all minds. And hobgoblin, it makes it sound like it's just a fantasy. See, what I don't want to do is look at someone's shitty behavior, identify some aspect of it, and then draw a recipe from it, which is never engage in that shitty behavior. That's what I'm trying to counter with my, for example, counter branding of a quote. What I did when I said, okay, I like that. I like the rhetoric of Banksy's comment. I'm now going to apply it to my enemy's mouth and see if it fits. Yes, Elon Musk would like that thing about tearing up the boxes. That's how I get myself into thinking about it from both sides. Let's see. The origins of consistency is the origins of life. Um, Been struggling with that work again this week. I am trying to figure out ways to make as intuitive as possible this, which I would argue is a more realistic approach to explaining what we are, and doing it intuitively without it falling into the typical distractions that make it so we don't end up understanding. That is, it is so prone to misunderstanding. And here's where I've gotten on this question of consistency and the origins of life. So from in physics, there is likely and unlikely change. No matter where you are, some change is unlikely. For example, that to just take an intuitive example to make clear what I'm talking about, it's very unlikely that in my current position, I could tip over the cup that's sitting on your table. There's too much distance between us. It's very unlikely that I could walk straight out this way through a wall into my garden. I'm talking as simple as that, and I'm saying that setting aside whether I want to or not, there is unlikely change from the get-go in the world. And therefore, the most consistent tendency is this thing that Jeff refers to as flow, first law of everything, which is um, whatever work is unlikely tends to become possible. So it's improbable and then it becomes possible to where anything goes. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Over time, uh, we will tend to see anything goes. That is, a molecule could be in any position relative to within its constraints. So you're always looking at things within boundary conditions. But there is this tendency for things to. So the most consistent thing in the world is a move towards inconsistency. Sorry, I like I said, I don't feel like I'm ready to make this completely explicable. But here we are, living beings with a what would have been very improbable change, having become extremely probable. The most likely thing that would have happened to me 10 billion years ago, had I suddenly appeared, would have been that I would fall apart very quickly. But here I am, very likely to not fall apart by tomorrow. Knock on wood. That is, I have changed probabilities, or probabilities have changed such that I am here. Now this is where I lose people. So I'm trying to get as clear and intuitive about this as possible. This morning, Terry and I were talking about it. It all can be managed in probability theory, but the problem is that probability theory pays almost no attention to what doesn't happen, and is paying all of its attention to what's likely to happen. So it's actually, I'm interested in an approach to this. We are interested in an approach to it that's actually more like improbability theory. How do the improbabilities at the origins of the universe ever end up becoming the improbabilities that we're dealing with now that life is here? It's so funny that I'm doing this live. I just feel like I'm on the edge of my ability to speak this thing. Soon to be a minor motion picture. Let's get back to clearer ground. If anybody's got any interest, we got some people here. I would love to hear what's on your mind, what you're thinking about. Here we go. How does the improbable become probable? Good. Thank you. Thank you. That grounds me a little bit. First of all, we're talking about a relationship between the improbable and the probable. And the way we would talk about this, the technical language that I'm trying to get clearer than is constraint. This constraint is unlikelinesses, things that are unlikely to happen. Like me tipping over the cup on your table, Jeff. So the more unlikely some things become, the more likely alternative things become. Um, So how to explain that in a way that makes it basically, I'll just jump to where we are right now, and I will work on this, and it will get clearer and for what it's worth. But I am preventing my own death. That's what it's through checks and balances. It's through actually counter movements, very much like the kind of um, pitting ideas against each other that we're just doing in the cognitive or conceptual realm. Those are checks and balances. They keep a system going. So to think about it in terms of a game, this is what we call an infinite game. If you and I were playing a game, a board game, and we kept on alternating who's dominant, who's prevailing. So I'm ahead for a little while, then you are ahead for a little while. That's kind of checks in balance with each other. And we make improbable the ending of the game. We make probable our persistence in the game. So how do we do that? That's actually by co-limiting or co-constraining each other in that game. That is, my runaway tendency would be to win the game, and your runaway tendency is to win the game. This would be true at the chemical level too. A chain reaction is very likely to just keep on chain reacting until it depleted all its resources, and then it dissipates according to the first law of everything. So, I mean, if we get I haven't been very specific about this, but this is the whole autogen model that I've been dealing with for these 30 years with Terry. This is an explanation how selves and trying ever emerged from chemistry. And it's got to be super simple because you got no evolution at this point, and there's no one designing anything. You got to work with simple chemistry. You're not going to go down to the quantum level. There's nothing trying at the quantum level. Let's just deal with simple, basic chemistry. And there's two phenomena that are common enough and intuitive enough. One is a chain reaction, which makes less and less probable that the raw materials that the chain reaction is relying on will stay raw materials. They'll get converted more and more. So the chain reaction is called reciprocal catalysis. It's a chain reaction. And imagine when you have these chain reactions, and this is just common chemistry, some of the products of the reaction are capable of doing more chain reacting, but some are not. Let me give you an example of how this would work. Imagine that I filled a room with a bunch of mousetraps that were all loaded with cheese. And they were all loaded, they were all triggered. And then I drop a ball in there, and one mousetrap bounces, you can imagine this, and you end up with a bunch of mousetraps triggering other mousetraps. But you also end up with a bunch of cheese flying off in every direction. The cheese is just a byproduct. It's not actually part of the chain reaction. Simple model. Okay, now imagine that those God, I'm so out on a limb today. It's funny. But if you got a chemical chain reaction that is also as a byproduct, like the equivalent of those cheese things, you've got these molecules, these proteins that happen to form into shells. Very much like viral shells. Those nothing assembles them. They simply fall together. They're like crystal formation. So you got a chain reaction that produces these crystal molecules that form shells. And what you end up with is, as the chain reaction is depleting, there happens to be these shells that capture some of the chain reaction molecules, keep them close enough together that if it break open in the presence of more raw materials for the chain reaction, the whole process resumes. That is my go-to story, simple as possible, no simpler, for how you could ever get a self and trying. And it doesn't look like much. It's got no self-awareness, got no feelings. It doesn't have DNA yet. And yet it does have the quality of when you break one of these shells that contains some of the chain reaction molecules close to each other, and it happens to break open in the presence of the raw materials that the chain reaction relies on. Because those molecules are close enough together, they are more likely to resume the chain reaction that produces the shell molecules that come together and produces the chain reaction. that encloses enough of the chain reaction, basically keeps a record of the chain reaction, that could break open again. It's a cycle between closed and open. Um, uh, let's see. So so that's a guess, fully plausible guess for how you'd get the first individuation and trying. And from there, we have explanations for how you'd end up with more likeliness to open up in the presence of raw materials, how you'd get the capacity to actually have a molecule that records the way DNA does, what we call template molecules. So, Jeff, I'm not sure what you mean by pure recipe here. Um, it's you could say it's a self-reciprocation. Well, so remember, I don't have a problem with recipes per se. I don't want to associate words with good or bad. I'm trying to how can I speak like you? I'm not sure it's a good idea. I feel like I'm on the edge of capability today, but I don't know how to speak like me. Um, one way is to be me, for better or worse. But anyway, um, let's go back there. I have some videos about how this autogen, this self-regenerator theory works. I did a Google talk about it. I wasn't at my best. I was also bonking, and then I was talking too fast. But it does lay out this argument for how you'd get the first self-containment. Would even that is how the unlikelification of dissipation. Yes, the autogen is what I'm talking about. Yeah. Um, let's see. The autogen recipe. Okay, so yeah. So let me try this out. He who's burnt by hot milk blows on ice cream. It's supposedly a Persian saying. Oversteps in the right direction is another way I talk about them. Overcorrection. So there are areas where recipes don't work. Obviously, I mean, I'm talking to you by means of an enormous number of reliable recipes. Uh, every algorithm my computer relies on, the web relies on, those are all recipes. Um, there are plenty of situations in which we are operating on recipe. It's called an algorithm. And indeed, for human beings, we need to operate on recipes a lot. You might have heard me say this: all life is habit accumulating. Living animals are habit seeking. What is a habit? It's an algorithm. Um, Humans are habit jonesing. It's way too much world. We can't possibly handle it all by 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 anything but recipes. To the extent we can, we want recipes, and there's even recipes for how to choose from your repertoire of recipes which recipe to use. That is, it goes layers deep that way. But I wouldn't want a recipe that says that because for example, the study group work we do on um, how to engage with people there's no talking to. When I say repertoire, not recipe, it's because of this is the most cutthroat and world dooming behavior we will ever have to deal with is people who will do anything to make sure you lose. You're trying to get them to be self-aware. They will do anything to avoid it. So that's where I think repertoire is especially important. But it's not like I would say I don't want to overgeneralize from that. I don't want to say that, therefore, when you're making a pizza, don't, don't use a recipe. I, I mean, how loose and how tight. Yes, so they hold on. So we're dealing with people who have a recipe, and the recipe that's what I've been making these short videos about, which is the recipes are super simple. And one of the mind-boggling things is there's no way to outsmart this dumbass behavior, or at least we have yet to find a way to reliably outsmart it. That's kind of the tragedy of the last decade, is recognizing this. There were people who noticed this before, but we didn't have nearly as much evidence that there is really, we're at a loss for ways to outsmart dumbass. Once someone has decided that they don't have to care about anything they don't care about, and they can pretend to care about anything that is useful to them to care about, we don't know what to do about them other than kill them or shut them in jail or not vote them into power. But there is so much power in their ability to play that dumbass recipe. Yeah, that's the tragedy we're dealing with right now. I don't know what to do about it, and I'm still trying to figure it out, and that's why it's repertoire, not recipe. I do have a general sense that there are really only 3 moves we've got with them, and that the variety of how we use them is important. They are assertion, accommodation, and space taking, and they all have their place. And there's interesting ways to mix and match them. And there are so many ways to assert, so many ways to accommodate, so many ways to take space, not just walking away. It's also just laughing at them. And remember that it's work. It's like fishing where there's no fish. You almost never catch a fish with these guys. And that's why I'm also fascinated by a conversation like that one with a woman in LA, because something got through to her. Apparently, some of these people balked at January 6th and suddenly were able to pop out and examine their own assumptions. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So I'll have more to say about how the improbable becomes improbable. How the improbable becomes probable. But it mostly has to do with other things becoming less probable. It's 20 questions is basically what it comes down to. So it's very improbable that what I'm thinking about in a game of 20 questions is a bubble I saw in 1967, before you were even born. I saw a soap bubble. Maybe it came off of a little pipe house. I'm just pulling something randomly, okay? How does it become more and more probable that that's what I'm thinking of? Through a process of elimination. That is, the more things become improbable, the more something else becomes probable relative to it. Thank you, Antonio. I'm really grateful to hear that stuff, especially during shaky weeks like this. But and also, there's nothing about me that could give this stuff up. I just have to admit, whatever the medium is, I am addicted to these ideas. I'm addicted to the comfort I get from having them to play with. It's what I'm inviting you to do, to find your peace of mind, your comfort, your satisfaction from this kind of exploration. I'd be lost without it. And I have to recognize that there have been a couple of these lives lately where I've talked about caring less about affirmation or reassurance. And I could get to a place where I'm doing it as if I have found some ways to care less about reassurance. And it's mostly not true. It's mostly not true. It's mostly just that as soon as something is a reliable source of reassurance, I don't want to admit that I'm getting reassurance from it. I would want to take it for granted. The only way I would know that I am relying on it as a source of affirmation or reassurance is if it disappeared. So I think we're all like that. That is, we need to not feel needy. And so we take whatever supply of what we need, we take it for granted when we can. And then you don't miss your water till your well runs dry. That's how that goes. So, but one way or another, no, I'm going to keep on doing this. I'm glad I have the means by which to keep on doing this. All right, let's see what else we've got here. We're all over the map today. let's see. There have been some. Oh, I did coin a term yesterday. This is not a cheerful term, but I coined two yesterday that I think are useful for us to keep in mind if we're trying to catch up with what's going on. One of them was plebiscide. So the plebs are the commoners, plebeian, right? And plebiscide is the extermination, the systematic extermination of the lower classes. This would be something new. I think it's something that is made possible by the automation. I think it might be the unspoken goal here. If I were Elon Musk, if I was going to put myself in his shoes, given the life he's had, given the success he's had, and given the influences he's been under, I would think that there's just way too many people at this point that were not necessary, that we're depleting resources, and we are not needed because we don't. We just it's basically Thanos from uh, the Marvel comic series. Depopulation has been stated. We just don't need as much of us. All of this care and concern for other people is not going to work out in the long run. We are in for great extinction, and all we need is the survival of the best and brightest and whitest, and they can be covered with machines. That we actually just don't need people anymore. Yes, the Curtis Yarvin plan. So yes, so it's being stated more, and yet it's not getting out in public much. I mean, for example, I just started looking at a video on Curtis Yarvin. I mean, if you had mentioned his name to me just yesterday, I probably wouldn't have known it. There's also a version of this around. I'd call it femicide, which is that we don't need women anymore. You just don't need them. Between porn, AI porn, robots, what are they good for? They're like inadequate men. Don't quote me on this. This is just me just trying to voice what might be going on in these people's minds. So it's not like Handmaid's Tale. It's much worse than that. Yeah, and you can kind of see where their reasoning comes from, and that one way or another, with climate crisis and all of that, we are going to see a depopulation. And how to fight that? These are really challenging questions, and I don't know what to do about them. Here's one framing of it that scares the shit out of me. I call it philosophy's choice. And it's a real challenge for liberals. And I am a liberal. I mean, in my heart, at least, I am trying to figure out how to make the world work for more of us, work better for more of us. That seems to be my goal. But philosophy's choice is borrowing from Sophie's choice. So far, the world has only had inequality. There's nothing we see about nature or biology or evolution that says that it's out for fairness. It's out for checks and balances, but the checks and balance, a stronger checks and balance will overpower a weaker checks and balance. So, and once again, I don't think checks and balances is good. The Nazis had great checks and balances. Trump movement has great checks and balances, but they're awful movements, and they will tend to overpower others. So what is philosophy's choice? It's this. If there's always been haves and have-nots, who would you choose to be the have-nots? And I'm not saying name the person you'd like to have dead. That might be a hint at how you would come up with a general rule, but who would you have be the have-nots? It's just one of the hardest things for us to recognize is that the evolution is not fair, but somehow we evolved the capacity to assume that it should be fair, or even that it started out fair. Okay, so Meow, you said the haves. Good, I get it. That is, if someone should give everything up, who should surrender and succumb and disappear, yeah, I've got a list of haves who I'd like to see disappear. And I do keep in mind the possibility that one day I could wake up, um, and and they'd all be gone. I mean, it's only the blood vessels inside. I mean, if blood vessels popped in the brains of 25 people, it would be a radically different world. So the haves or the greedy, I understand that. It's still a little hard. I mean, what you're talking about there is we need checks and balances. So whoever the haves are, and they will keep on changing, they will be undermined by the have-nots. I can see that. One way we could talk about the challenge that we've been facing recently is that after years of saying, united, we can overpower the few, it's not true. It hasn't turned out to be true. Even though there are large numbers of have-nots, they are not so far able to consistently keep the haves from having too much. The rich do get richer and the poor do get poorer. They're keeping us divided. Okay, so there's your answer, and let me try this as a challenge to you. Okay, we all agree here. We've just set down the rules, and the rules are straightforward. If you have too much, we're going to make it so you have less. So it's kind of like communism. Okay, uh, what what problems will arise next from that? There's always a next dilemma. So let me hear if you could think of the next questions that arise. What are the what are the problems that will result from this solution? And I don't say that to point to the futility of it, but actually to make the solution stronger. Um, you know, in a way, we're talking about Animal Farm, the book Animal Farm, Orwell's book, because they came to that conclusion, and then he's pointing out, and then there's the next problem. This is also what Saul Alinsky was big on, which is that he doesn't actually think that the have-nots are more virtuous people. Not at all. He thinks that if they became haves, they would become just as nasty. It seemed that the rich get richer because federal government spending, which is the source of UDR, is targeted to the rich. Good. Okay, so you go that far, and then you say, okay, but why that? Why is it? Because you could land right there and say that's the problem. But I would say that the problem is broader than that, which is why does the federal government do that? Well, you've got these few people who have the deep pockets and have the priority of gaming the system, and over time they will have gamed the government so that they will win. So they're not playing the game at a level of power you get them gaming the play. The haves will become the have-nots, right? Lotto winners tend to lose everything shortly. Good. Okay, this is good. The federal government makes the rules, but then you have to ask, okay, well, but do they make them out of? They tend to make rules that benefit the people who benefit them. What do you have there? You have a checks and balance system between the rich and the federal government. That is, they're keeping themselves nicely alive and thriving. They're preventing each other from ending. Because I don't want to just rehash old solutions that make me feel good and proud, but will only lead back to the same problems. We have trouble keeping the checks and balances checked and balanced. That's exactly right. LBG say if you can convince a lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, yeah, that's right. So we're on all these interesting questions about it. I guess this is a place where I don't want to do the thing where you study to just affirm your position, or to diagnose with greater satisfaction. I keep on wanting to get to the next dilemma, the always next dilemma. Having found, let's see, after finding solutions that fit, I like to sit back and just kick. No, after finding solutions that fit, I like to back and just sit on my laurels, but then a resulting dilemma proves questions in life just don't quit. So the kind of study we were talking about earlier, where you just keep on, where you just affirm what you already believe. Like if you just read Chomsky over and over and over and said, "Amen, amen," that's the problem. These guys were the problem. All sorts of stuff. That's like Bible study. That's like Trump study. I don't want to do that. I want to ask the next questions and then think about them, even if they're disappointing. I don't want to throw up my hands, and I don't want to puke up recipes that won't work. Okay, let's see. So I, I don't know where we go from here, other than so you also recognize that there's this thing I've been talking about for a while, which is that whenever we do something Banksy style, like let's think outside the box, whenever we begin to get any traction at all, then the powerful will simulate whatever grassroots movement there is, and use it more effectively. They'll basically beat us at that game. So that's why I'm not very much inspired by anarchy, punk movements, etc., because I know that they'll just, if they gain any power. I don't know if you've seen this Brazilian movie. It's gotten some attention lately. I'm Still Here, it's called. It's about what we're probably entering into in the United States, which is this kind of, it's fascism or authoritarianism, but it's just kind of like the shadow that lurks around. You can still get away with talking the way we do here. I can still make my protest videos, but if anything ever got any kind of power, it would be trounced in no time. So check out that movie if you haven't seen it already. I'm Still Here, I think is what it's called, or We're Still Here. Like regulation to wipe out mom and pop shops. That's right. So what we're noticing is that the more power you get, the more you can, you don't have to play the game, you get to game the play. You get to rig the game in your favor. And that's what's been most shocking, for example, about this big, beautiful bill, is that the gaming of the play is such that we can wonder if there's any coming back from this. And I guess, I mean, I don't run on hope. I find it a very unreliable fuel. I run on productivity and curiosity. I hope you do too, because no, hope is a really unreliable fuel. It's a great motivator for analysis and research. It's not. I just don't want it distorting my analysis and research. So uh, yeah, patrimonialism. Surely that's right. It's a patronage system. Um, pay to play, that kind of thing. But one way to think about what's coming up, you could say our last best hope. The only guardrail that seems to remain is public opinion. Public opinion has been very discouraging. 4 weeks ago, Trump was down 10 points in approval. This week, he's down 5 points. Okay, but it hasn't hit home yet. All we've seen is moral outrages. What we haven't seen yet is the savaging of lives, the absolute extermination of all sorts of things that Trump voters rely on. So if there's anything I'm watching over the next few weeks, it's when the tariffs hit, when it becomes impossible to live the lives that people have come to expect, when the disappointment with Trump becomes, when their dream becomes a nightmare. Will there be any reaction? And even if there is any reaction, will there be any way that it could actually influence who's in power? And I just don't know. I don't know. I've been on the fence about whether democracy will kill tyranny before tyranny kills democracy for 15 years anyway. And yeah, I've been on the fence. I just don't know. In the meantime, there's so much more to study, so much to be curious about, so much to be productive about. Here's a good place for the advertisement. I still want to have a conversation like this. I mean, look at who shows up here. Most of us are the same people coming back over and over. I'm grateful that YouTube makes this possible, but I would much prefer a conversation. So email me if you would like to be private email list. I won't share it with anybody else, but it will be an opportunity for us. I would make a private blind copy mailing to you guys, and we would have this conversation in a way where I can hear your voices and you can talk, and we can, we can follow things out in a different way than in this medium where I'm just monologuing for this entire time. Um, uh, Email me about that. Also, I think that work that we do in the study group, which is, by the way, meeting tomorrow, it meets at 9 in the morning on Sunday morning, California time. I think that's a really useful way to use to feel curious and productive. More and more, I think that we just got to rely on our capacity, on the potential that nationwide will see some disappointment in Trump and can channel that into something other than more of their self-rationalizing bullshit. So how to tease out a capacity for curiosity in people who are about to be roundly disappointed. That's, I think, a useful thing for you to do with what leverage you got. It's even better than sharing memes or reading affirming stuff about how cruel and mean these guys are, or how we finally have evidence that they're real hypocrites. Um, uh, let's see. And so email me. Just email me. JS at Jeremy Sherman or JerShare6. I'll throw it in here in case you don't have it. It's kind of obvious where it is. And so that would be for the study group or for just getting together as we do here, but doing it in a way where everybody can talk. There we go. Let's see. All right, I'm looking. There's a bunch of good comments coming through here. Let's see. Instead of appealing to someone's best interest to do something, how about appealing to their worst interest to not do something? Michael, I would like to hear more about that. That sounds interesting to me. Yeah, I think that's kind of reverse psychology, as Antonio says. They are embodying the Machiavellian political philosophy. Yeah, in a way, Machiavelli gets a bad rep. He's actually the founder of political science. He's brilliant. But yes, I understand what you mean. It's nothing but cold, callous sadomasochism. Patricia Wise, let's see. That's the destruction of U.S. It's so disarming. Soft power of altruism was working. Why destroy that? Once again, if the way you turn hope into curiosity and productivity is to take your rhetorical questions like why destroy that and turn it into a real question. Why are they destroying it? Step outside of your frustration with it, which motivates a rhetorical question, into a neutral, power of neutral thinking, analytical thing. What are they doing? Try to put yourself in their shoes. Think that through. I think it's a very useful move, and it makes for, I mean, one way or another, I don't know how this is going to end, and it could end miserably for me, but I actually want to take careful notes and understand it best I can, to understand what I can about human nature, even if I'm doomed by it. I mean, I'm trying to not be doomed by all this. I'm trying to make unlikely our demise, but I sure want to use this time also to understand for both reasons, because understanding is its own reward, and also because understanding makes for better strategy. If we're hand-wringing, if we're outraged, if we're asking rhetorical questions, the more we do that, the less we're understanding what's actually going on. It's all hands on deck. Let's try to cathart and vent, and then roll up our sleeves and get analytic and try and figure out what the actual fuck's going on. Because apparently we don't understand it well enough. If we understood it better, there's probably a better chance that we wouldn't be in this predicament in the first place. So to recognize that we don't actually understand what's going on well enough, and to keep on trying to understand, and to keep our own self-satisfaction out of the way, really useful. Their rage can be, surely, their rage can be emotionally exhausting. Um, I think it can get to that point, but I also want to remember that their rage is emotionally exhilarating. It's scornography. It's the satisfaction of just taking umbrage. It is so much fun. Have you ever experienced that? I hope you have, because then you'll understand them better. Do you know how much fun it is to gird your loins for battle and say, "Oh, hell no," and pretend, as this is the video I made this morning, that the fact that you could spot some human quality in someone else proves that you're superhuman. They're just getting off on that. I mean, so I hope it gets exhausting for them. Um, but it's one of the most reliable sources of satisfaction. Um, uh, to kill other people's buzz is a source of great buzz, for lots of us. And if you haven't experienced, try it sometime, just so you know what that drug is like. It is so you feel like a god. Um, so I don't want to just sustain them. I want to understand them, right? Okay. As long as we keep trying to understand. And this is not understanding has nothing to do with sympathy or charity towards them at all. This is fundamental in my work. You know, when we talk about empathy, we're talking about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Think like the torturer does. The torturer, or like Machiavelli does, he tries to understand, he tries to put himself in someone else's shoes. Um, yes, good. I don't. I'm not. Yeah, I'm. Surely, I love you. I love that you're here. I don't know you. I haven't seen a picture of you, but your attention is fabulous to me. So if I say something about the counter argument, this is not personal. I'm just trying to understand it as best you can and invite you to visit those other sides. It's not. Please, I just get tired of their broken record. And yes, okay. Um, let's see. So a torturer. Empathy is how you do a better job of being nasty to someone. You have to understand where they're coming from if you want to undercut them. And I'm trying to undercut the right people. I'm not trying to name call. I'm trying to name call with surgical precision. I'm not trying to put people down. I'm trying to put the right people down, not the wrong people down. Um, uh, yes. So that's why we are still trying to understand better, and why curiosity and productivity, because productivity for me is I put something out, um, I feel a sense of accomplishment for having done that. I like the evenings where I feel like I've had a fruitful day, um, and then I get some response to that, and that's what piques my curiosity. That's why I would like this conversation to be more uh, multi-sided than just me rapping at your texts. And um, and and that's how we will understand better. That's where the curiosity plays in. Okay, by next week, I'm sure I will have it all solved, and you'll be glad to hear that I have it all solved. Finally, I'll be able to explain in ways I wasn't today how unlikely change um, is the foundation from which you can explain everything that emerges from it. Uh, how unlikely changes um, grow in complicated ways that I can't explain this week. Um, do I hope to see as many of you as want to tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when we do the study group. That is more of a give and take conversation. That is not done with the text on the side. It's people actually talking to each other. It is not an emotional support group, but I have found, for me and for many, it has proven to be, as a side effect, that emotional support you need. A sense that you're actually engaging your curiosity and productivity and not just relying on hope, that unreliable fuel. All right. All right. I will see you next time if you're here. And I'm delighted that you are. Thanks a lot for being here. We'll talk more. All right. Bye bye.